Of Ice, Mounds, and Aliens by Thom Cantrall. In western Washington, there exists an interesting anomaly. South of the state capital of Olympia, and extending to an area known as Grand Mound just north of Centralia, there exists a vast prairie covered in small mounds of dirt and debris known as the Mima mounds. There is great controversy among the scientists, and even more so among laypersons, as to the origin of this dimpled prairie. It seems the geologists are of one mind as to their cause, where the sociologists tend to have other theories and other ideas. There are about as many theories as there are theorists, including those espousing extraterrestrial visitations. I have, in reading Tom Powell's excellent book, Edges of Science, found something with which I totally disagree. My disagreement is so profound and deep that while reading it, I ceased reading that chapter and moved on to the next. The book overall is much too good to miss very much. Our disagreement concerns his treatise on the subject wrote in the first paragraph, the Mima mounds. While I expect anyone who purchases this volume to read Tom's discussion in total, I decided to take a bit of time here and offer a simple rebuttal. This is an area with which I am totally familiar. I did some of my geology work in college in this area, and my best friend for many years lived on this golf ball dimpled prairie. I even helped him level the mounds on his ground so he could grow hay to feed his livestock. So I am very familiar with the physiology of the mounds. Grand Mound is interesting in how it was formed. Prior to about 12 to 15,000 years ago, the earth down to about mid-Washington was covered by ice. The Great Wisconsin Glacier covered most of North America above latitude 47, and in this particular area, the Vashon lobe of that great glacier pushed down to a latitude of 46.8. Its snout acting like a giant, mile-high bulldozer blade and pushing the till and rock carried on the ice up into a ridge that extended for many miles along that snout. That great ridge of debris we call today Grand Mound. It is the southern terminus of the entire Wisconsin glaciation and lies today south of milepost 88 on Interstate 5. Yes, there were alpine glaciers further south. The Sierra Nevada and the Cascade Mountains were wreathed in glacial ice, but those glaciers were not connected to the main body of ice. They originated high in the mountains and descended the slopes to the flatland below, where they terminated, just as described in the Grand Mound orientation. The ridge rises some 400 feet above the prairie floor and is today covered with a mantle of trees, mostly Douglas fir. Even today, it takes but little imagination to visualize the immense, mile or more thick wall of ice butted up against the ridge of glacial till that had been pushed into place by that wall. Of course, for many centuries, the snout of the glacier retreated back only to push forward again with the next cooling period. During the periods of retreat, immense volumes of meltwater ran off the pack, creating virtual rivers beneath and alongside the great clumps of ice. It takes no great stretch of one's imagination to see, as the meltback continued, gargantuan blocks of ice sitting disconnected from the main pack as it retreated even further north. Now, what I'm about to describe can be easily demonstrated by anyone so wishing more proof. When a large block of ice is left in the open to melt in the warmth of the day, the bottom, that part in contact with the ground, will melt with cup-shaped indentations all over that surface. All one has to do to demonstrate this is to obtain a 10 to 20 pound block of ice and leave it out a while on a day that is warmer than 32 degrees Fahrenheit and watch what happens. The cups on the underside block of ice this size are admittedly only inches in diameter. But how large would they be on a block approaching a cubic mile in size? These ridgelets are officially known as drumlins and are everywhere evident where ice once was. It is commonly understood that the reason Canada has little to no topsoil, except that generated in the last 10,000 years or so, is that the glaciers scrubbed it from its place in Canada and carried it south to the end of their travel. This, of course, amounted to millions of tons of debris and soil being carried on the backs of the glaciers, to be mixed in the slurry of ice and water that was the result of the actions of that ice and water and carried to the vicinity of the voids created in the base of the great blocks of degrading ice. Now, 12,000 years later, the ice has retreated to the farthernmost northern climes, and the dimpled prairie sits vacant, tempting people to assume their own favorite pet theories for the formation of the mounds. It has been suggested, seriously by some college professors, that there once lived a race of giant gophers here that created all these hills in their search for their gopher food. Others completely believe that since trees create a small hill of duff beneath their canopy as they mature, that these were merely the result of a great ancient forest that must have, for some reason or another, disappeared in the interim. A favorite among some factions is that this was a landing area for ET, that somehow vast numbers of interstellar travelers made their stop here. According to the thesis advanced by Thom in Edges of Science, there is a sizable population of resident aliens, the ET kind, not the another country kind, living underground across the world. It seems that wherever in the world these mounds are found, they are called Mima mounds because they were first identified and investigated near the now non-existent town of Mima. These underground residences were, according to the author's premise, excavated from the solid dome beneath the mantle of the earth. Of course, excavations on this scale would generate enormous amounts of waste to have to dispose of in some manner or another. It is proposed that these mounds are the great repository of the material excavated underground by the ETs now living there. The author did not explain why these ETs chose areas exactly where the great glaciers ended their journeys to create these fields of enigmatic dimples, nor did he explain, to my satisfaction anyway, why the mounds are made of soil and stone dust mixed with so much organic material that the resultant soil is really quite fertile and grows seeds very well. To the contrary, I have never seen any tailings pile that contained anything other than pure mineral rock. Every underground excavation that I have ever investigated consisted only of rock, not organic material in any form. Just a simple aside here on the matter of global warming and climate change. This great melt-off began about 15,000 years ago. It continued with fits and starts, delays and restarts through today. Is the planet's surface warming? Obviously so. Or those huge sheets of ice would still be there. And they're not. I think it is short-sighted to even suggest anything else be true when the geologic record is so clear. The problem comes in when we start considering the cause of this warming. As one can probably imagine, there were no SUVs, no coal-fired power plants, and a virtually zero carbon footprint by the few people living there at that time. But still it happened. Also, in those days, there were no politicians trying to promote their own agenda and control the movements of their populations. Today, that is not true. Hence, they would have us believe that we are causing this warming. Think about it a bit and formulate your own answer. In fact, it appears that sunspot activity has more to do with our weather than does carbon. These are the facts. To me, it is a simple matter to determine the origin of the 6 to 36 foot diameter mounds, but others may not see it this way. I don't feel that it takes extinct populations of gophers never found in the fossil record, nor even the efforts of E.T. to create this wonderfully natural area. But to each his own. From the time J. Harlan Bretz, and yes, his first name was just that, the letter J. The geologist famed for having formulated the Columbia River flood theory first started his investigations. There have been no noticeable incidents of complete agreement. So I will do as J did, and leave it in the minds of the reader to reach his own conclusions. Thom Cantrall.